What's the most dangerous word a man can say? It's not a threat. It's not a curse. Sometimes it's a single word, whispered so quietly that only one person can hear it, in a room full of armed killers who suddenly don't dare to breathe. A blind girl stumbled out of a storm and crashed straight into the chest of the most feared man in the city. 6 guns came up in an instant. And then he leaned down to her ear and said just one word that changed everything. Stay with me, because nothing about this story is what it seems. The avenue was pure chaos. Honking cabs, frantic shouts, and the relentless hammering of a sudden downpour that had turned the streets into rivers. Lydia Hayes tightened her grip on the strap of her heavy cello case, letting its familiar weight anchor her against the surging crowd. Being blind in the city meant navigating an ocean of sound and touch. Doing it in the middle of a flash flood felt almost impossible. Her white cane swept left and right in practiced, rhythmic arcs, but the rising water was washing away the texture of the pavement, drowning out the small clues she relied on to find her way. Her shoes were already soaked through. Panic was beginning to claw at her throat. She needed shelter, and she needed it right now. Through the roar of the rain, she caught it, the soft, muffled hush of heavy revolving doors, the faint, elegant strain of a string quartet playing somewhere inside. A hotel lobby. She turned toward the warmth radiating from the building, toward the subtle scent of expensive flowers and floor polish, and pushed her way through the heavy brass doors. The sudden silence of the grand foyer washed over her, a comforting contrast to the storm outside. She paused, shaking the rain from her dark hair, her chest heaving as she tried to find her bearings in the vast, echoing space. What she didn't know was that she had just walked straight into the heart of a war. Less than 50 feet away, a man named Cassian was descending the grand staircase. He moved with the smooth, predatory grace of someone who didn't just own the building, but owned the lives of everyone inside it. In a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that hugged his broad shoulders, he was the undisputed head of the most feared crime family on the entire eastern seaboard. He was flanked by 6 heavily armed men, led by his ruthless second-in-command. They had just finished a brutal negotiation upstairs. A rival faction had tried to siphon money from the family's offshore accounts, and Cassian had dealt with the traitor personally, leaving a broken man bleeding on the carpet of the penthouse. His adrenaline was still running hot, his dark eyes scanning the lobby for threats. He was a man who trusted no one and forgave nothing. "Bring the convoy around to the front," he ordered his underboss, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that demanded instant obedience. "And have the rivals' warehouses dealt with before midnight. Leave nothing behind." "Consider it done, boss," his man replied, reaching for his earpiece. Cassian took another step toward the exit, his mind already shifting to the logistics of a full-blown war. And then it happened. Lydia, disoriented by the strange acoustics and the lingering panic from the storm, took a hurried step forward, searching for the front desk. Her wet heel caught the edge of a slick marble tile. She lost her balance, her heavy cello case throwing her violently off-center. She pitched forward, hands flying out to brace for the floor. Instead, she slammed into a wall of solid, unyielding muscle. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs. Her white cane clattered loudly against the marble, the sharp sound echoing through the cavernous lobby like a gunshot. In a fraction of a second, the mood in that beautiful lobby flipped from luxury to lethal tension. The unmistakable, terrifying sound of 6 pistols being drawn and racked filled the air. The bodyguards instantly formed a tactical half-circle around their boss, weapons trained on the soaking wet girl who had dared to crash into him. "Step back!" the underboss barked, finger tightening. Lydia froze, her heart slamming against her ribs. She couldn't see the guns, but she could smell the sudden sharp tang of gun oil, the aggressive bite of cologne. She could hear the rustle of expensive suits and the heavy, synchronized breathing of men ready to kill. Terror locked her in place. She was pinned against the chest of a man who felt like a statue carved from stone. Cassian had reacted on pure instinct. When the figure tumbled toward him, his combat reflexes flared. His large hands gripped her shoulders to shove her away, and then he looked down, and time seemed to grind to a complete halt. He saw the long dark hair plastered to her pale cheeks. He saw the panicked, sightless eyes staring blankly at his collarbone. And then his gaze locked onto a small, delicate, crescent-shaped scar just beneath her right jaw. A scar he had personally paid the best surgeons in the world to minimize 10 years ago. His breath caught in his throat. The cold, calculating crime boss, a man who had just ordered the deaths of dozens without blinking, suddenly looked like he'd been struck by lightning. His grip on her shoulders softened, shifting from defensive aggression to something almost desperate. Possessive. "Boss?" his underboss asked, confusion in his hard voice. "Give the word." But Cassian didn't look at his men. He didn't look at the terrified hotel guests cowering behind the pillars. His eyes were locked entirely on the trembling girl in his arms. The girl he had spent a decade watching from the shadows. The girl he had sworn to protect, no matter the cost. He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear, and whispered a single word that sent a shockwave through the entire room. Mine. It wasn't a claim of ownership. It was a vow, soaked in 10 years of buried guilt and an obsession that defied all logic. The silence that followed was deafening. Lydia trembled, her heightened senses racing to process everything at once. The man holding her smelled of rain, expensive cologne, and underneath it all, the faint metallic scent of fresh blood. "Put the guns away," Cassian commanded. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried an authority that left no room for hesitation. "Boss, we don't know who," his underboss started. "I said, put them away," Cassian snarled, throwing his second-in-command a glare so venomous the hardened killer actually took a step back. The sound of weapons being holstered rippled through the lobby. Lydia finally found her voice, barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. I couldn't see. I slipped. Please just let me get my cane." She tried to pull away, but his hands stayed on her arms, firm but gentle. "You're not going back out there," Cassian said softly, his tone completely transformed from the monster he'd been seconds before. He reached down and retrieved her fallen cane, pressing it gently into her trembling hand. Then he turned to his underboss. "Take her cello. Carefully. It's a late 18th century instrument. If you scratch it, I'll take your hand." Lydia gasped. How could a complete stranger possibly know the exact age and make of her prized cello? Before she could protest, he draped his heavy, dry coat around her shivering shoulders. "Walk with me, Lydia." Hearing her own name from this dangerous stranger's lips sent a jolt of pure ice down her spine. "Who are you? How do you know my name?" she demanded, trying to dig her heels into the floor. But his momentum was unstoppable. He guided her through the revolving doors, surrounded by a shield of armed men. "I'm someone who owes you a debt," he replied, cryptic, as they stepped out into the storm. A massive black armored limousine idled at the curb, its rear door already held open by a stone-faced driver. "I'm not getting in a car with you!" Lydia shouted, panic finally overriding her shock. She swung her cane defensively, but Cassian caught it mid-air with lightning speed. "Lydia, listen to me," he said, his voice dropping to a desperate, intense register. "Right now, men are kicking down the door of your apartment. If you go home tonight, you will die. Get in the car." The sheer conviction in his voice, paired with the terrifying mention of an invasion at her home, shattered her resistance. Numb with shock, she let him guide her into the warm leather interior. His underboss placed the cello carefully in the trunk before climbing into the front. The heavy doors sealed shut, cutting off the storm entirely, and the car slid into traffic. The drive was agonizingly silent. Lydia sat rigidly against the door, clutching her cane like a weapon, while Cassian sat across from her, his gaze fixed on her face. He poured a glass of dark whiskey and placed it gently into her hand. "Drink. It'll stop the shivering," he said softly. She took a small burning sip, the warmth grounding her. Why is someone trying to kill me? She asked, her voice cracking. I'm a cellist. I play weddings and symphonies. I don't have enemies. You don't, Cassian corrected, pouring himself a glass. Your father did. Lydia's head snapped toward his voice. My father was an actuary. He died in a car crash 10 years ago. Cassian let out a heavy, cynical sigh. Your father was a brilliant man, Lydia, but he wasn't an actuary. He was the chief financial fixer for my organization. Lydia's breath caught. You're lying. My father was a good, boring man. He worked in a cubicle. He worked in a secured vault deep beneath the Diamond District, Cassian countered, his tone holding no malice, only grim truth. He laundered hundreds of millions of dollars for my father. He was a ghost in the financial system, the best we ever had. But 10 years ago, our rivals found out who he was. They wanted him to hand over the ledgers. He leaned forward. That car crash. It wasn't a drunk driver, Lydia. It was a hit. Your father swerved to take the brunt of the impact so that you would survive in the passenger seat. The shattered glass took your sight, but his sacrifice saved your life. Tears pricked Lydia's unseeing eyes as the buried trauma of that horrific night came roaring back. The screeching tires, the shattering glass, her father's final choked gasp as he held her hand in the wreckage. Why are you telling me this now? She sobbed, the glass shaking in her grip. Why ruin my memory of him? Because the man who ordered his death just discovered that your father's daughter is still alive, Cassian said, his voice tightening with suppressed rage. He thinks your father left the encrypted ledger with you. They were at your apartment tonight to torture it out of you. The limousine pulled smoothly into a private underground garage, heavy steel gates slamming shut behind them. For 10 years, I have watched from the shadows, Cassian confessed, a vulnerability in his voice that jarred against everything else about him. And then the pieces of Lydia's life began snapping together with terrifying clarity. The anonymous scholarship to the conservatory, she whispered. Funded through a shell company overseas, Cassian confirmed. The experimental eye surgeries, paid in cash. Me, he replied simply. He reached across the console, his large, warm hand gently enveloping her trembling fingers. He didn't force the contact, leaving room for her to pull away. But she was too stunned to move. When my father died, I took over, Cassian said, his thumb lightly tracing her knuckles. I swore on his grave that the debt we owed your father would be paid. I promised to keep you safe. You were never supposed to know about me, Lydia. You were supposed to live a beautiful, ordinary life in the light, far away from my darkness. The car door opened, and the cold air of the garage rushed in. But tonight, the darkness found you anyway, Cassian said, stepping out and offering his hand. Welcome to the most secure fortress in the city. You'll stay here until every last one of our enemies is gone. Lydia gripped his hand and stepped out of the car. She had stumbled into that hotel seeking shelter from a storm. Instead, she'd walked straight into a golden cage, held by a man who had been secretly shaping her entire life from the shadows. The penthouse was a fortress suspended a quarter of a mile above the chaotic streets below. For 3 days, Lydia lived in a world of suffocating luxury. Her bare feet learned the landscape of heated silk rugs and cool marble. The air was always perfectly controlled, carrying the faint scent of white tea and fig. And yet, for all the comfort, it was a prison in the sky. Cassian treated her with a terrifying, reverent obsession. He barely slept. Late into the night, Lydia could hear his measured pacing across the hardwood floors. He fed her elaborate meals from a private chef, gave her racks of soft loungewear, and spent hours simply sitting in the corner of the living room, just listening to her play. But beneath this gilded cage, the war was boiling over. The rival family, desperate and cornered, was tearing the city apart looking for her. Sirens wailed endlessly from the streets far below, a distant symphony of the chaos Cassian was unleashing to crush his enemies. On the 4th evening, the calm shattered. His underboss burst through the heavy doors, his breathing audible even over the sonata Lydia was playing. "Boss," His voice was tight, urgent. They just made a move on the airstrip. They intercepted a shipment of our heavy weapons. It's a bloodbath. Our men are pinned down. Cassian cursed, the sound of a glass slamming onto a table echoing through the room. He's getting desperate. He knows we're closing the net. I need to be there to coordinate the extraction. It's risky, his man warned. It could be a distraction. I don't have a choice. If I lose that shipment, the others will see it as weakness. Cassian snarled. Lydia heard the metallic scrape of him loading a magazine into his pistol. He crossed the room and stopped inches from where she sat with her cello. Lydia, he said, his voice instantly softening into that possessive tone that made her skin prickle. I have to leave for a few hours. The building is on total lockdown. The elevators need biometric clearance. No one gets in or out. Are you going to be safe? She asked, her voice trembling perfectly, projecting the image of the terrified civilian he believed her to be. I'm always safe, he murmured, his knuckles gently brushing her cheek. I'm leaving Daniel to oversee your protection. He's my top captain. You have nothing to fear. With a rush of cold air and the heavy thud of the reinforced doors, Cassian and his underboss were gone. The vast penthouse fell into an eerie, suffocating silence. Lydia sat perfectly still, her hands resting on the strings of her cello. She focused her hearing, mapping the room. The faint hum of the refrigerator, the whistle of wind against the reinforced glass, and the deliberate, heavy breathing of the man Cassian had left behind. Daniel. He stood near the entryway. He smelled of cheap tobacco, peppermint gum, and underneath it all, the distinct odor of nervous sweat, the kind of sweat that comes when a man's adrenaline is spiking. So, Daniel's voice finally broke the silence, and it lacked the respect he usually showed around Cassian. There was a cruel, sharp edge to it now. The famous blind princess sitting on a ghost fortune. Lydia didn't move. Cassian said you were here to protect me. Daniel let out a low, humorless chuckle, and then she heard the distinct, terrifying sound of a silencer being screwed onto a pistol. Cassian is a fool, he sneered, footsteps moving slowly across the rug toward her. He let his obsession with you blind him to the business. You don't burn down half the city over a girl. Our rivals offered me $3 million and a slice of territory to open the door from the inside. That attack at the airstrip, just bait to get the boss out of the building. Lydia's breathing grew shallow. You're betraying him. I'm securing my retirement, Daniel corrected. He was close now. She could feel the heat radiating off him. They don't want you dead, sweetheart. Not yet. They want the ledger your father hid. The master account numbers for all the shell corporations. Your father was a paranoid man. He wouldn't just destroy it. He left it with you. I don't know what you're talking about, Lydia whimpered, shrinking back against the neck of her cello. I'm just a musician. I've been blind since I was 12. Cut the act! Daniel spat, reaching out and grabbing a fistful of her hair, yanking her head back. She cried out in pain. You're going to tell me exactly how to access those accounts, or I'm going to start breaking those delicate, expensive fingers of yours. One by one. And right there, Daniel made his first fatal mistake. He assumed her blindness meant helplessness. He assumed the trembling girl in front of him was nothing more than a fragile victim. What he didn't know, what nobody knew, was that her father, a man hunted by the most dangerous criminals on the coast, had spent his final years preparing his daughter for the exact moment the shadows finally caught up with her. Please, Lydia sobbed, dropping her cello bow. Her hand scrambled blindly across the floor, reaching for her white cane lying near the chair. I'll tell you whatever you want. That's a good girl, Daniel mocked, loosening his grip slightly, his arrogance peaking. Where is it? Lydia's fingers wrapped tightly around the grip of her cane. The ledger isn't a book, she whispered. And then something changed. The trembling stopped. The tears vanished. Daniel frowned, leaning closer. What did you say? I said, Lydia's voice turned to ice, it's not a book. You pathetic amateur. In a blur of motion so fast Daniel couldn't even process it, she didn't just stand up. She exploded upward. Using her grip on his forearm as leverage, she twisted her whole body, driving the heel of her palm into the nerve cluster under his jaw with bone-rattling force. Daniel choked, his vision flashing white, his grip on her hair releasing completely. Before he could raise his pistol, Lydia whipped the cane through the air. Her thumb pressed a hidden button on the grip, and with a sharp metallic click, a long, razor-sharp blade shot out from the tip. She slashed upward with surgical precision, severing the tendons in his right wrist. A scream tore from his throat as the pistol clattered uselessly to the floor. He stumbled back, clutching his bleeding arm in absolute shock. You! He stammered, unable to comprehend that the fragile blind girl had just dismantled him in 3 seconds. Lydia didn't hesitate. Her spatial awareness, honed over a decade of relying entirely on sound and air pressure, was flawless. She stepped forward and swept his legs out from under him with a brutal kick to the knee. Daniel crashed onto his back, gasping. Lydia calmly stepped over him and pressed the tip of her blade directly against the artery in his throat. "My father didn't hide the ledger, Daniel," she said, her tone as cold and commanding as any crime boss. "He encoded it. It's hidden in the sheet music of an original concerto he composed for me. I memorized every account number, every routing code, every shell corporation, when I was 15 years old. I have held the financial reins of 2 empires in my head this entire time." Daniel stared up at her blank, unseeing eyes, real terror finally setting in. She wasn't a victim. She was a weapon her father had built and left behind. "I've known Cassian was watching me for 10 years, Lydia continued, pressing the blade just enough to draw a bead of blood. "I let his men shadow me. I let myself be brought here, because I knew our enemies would eventually try to finish what they started, and I needed Cassian's resources to wipe them off the map." Suddenly, the heavy doors to the penthouse burst open with the force of an explosion. Cassian stormed in, his jacket gone, his shirt stained with blood, his pistol raised and ready. His men flooded in behind him, having realized the airstrip attack was a diversion, and raced back across the city like madmen. Cassian froze, the breath leaving his lungs. The scene before him defied all logic. His fragile, terrified Lydia was standing over his top captain, a bloodied blade pressed to the traitor's throat. Her posture was flawless, radiating a cold, lethal authority that commanded the entire room. "Lydia," Cassian whispered, lowering his weapon an inch, his mind struggling to process the dangerous predator standing in his living room. Lydia didn't turn her head. "He sold you out, Cassian. 3 million and a slice of territory. He came for the ledger." His underboss looked at the bleeding, terrified captain, then at the blind cellist, his jaw nearly hitting the floor. "Boss, she completely took him down, alone." And Cassian's shock slowly melted into something far more dangerous. A dark, magnificent smile spread across his face. The obsession he'd held for the innocent girl transformed in an instant into a profound, terrifying awe for the queen standing before him. "Take Daniel down to the soundproof room," Cassian ordered, his voice vibrating with lethal pride. "He gets to live just long enough to tell us exactly where our enemy is sleeping tonight. And then he doesn't." His men hauled the weeping traitor off the floor and dragged him out. The doors clicked shut, leaving Cassian and Lydia alone in the shattered luxury of the penthouse. Cassian holstered his weapon and walked slowly toward her. Lydia pressed a button on her cane, and the blade retracted seamlessly back into the shaft. He stopped inches from her, the scent of gunpowder and rain radiating off his clothes. He reached out, his blood-stained hands gently framing her face. "You played me," he murmured, his thumb tracing the scar on her jaw. There was no anger in his voice, only deep, reverent fascination. "For a decade, I thought I was the guardian angel protecting a helpless girl in the dark." "I was never helpless, Cassian," Lydia replied, leaning into his touch, a dangerous smile finally breaking across her lips. "You just preferred the illusion. My father was the smartest man in your whole organization. Did you really think he'd leave me defenseless?" Cassian leaned down, his lips brushing against hers in a fierce, possessive promise. "He dies tonight. Every warehouse, Every safe house, every last soldier loyal to him will burn before the sun comes up. I know, Lydia whispered, her hands sliding up to grip the lapels of his ruined shirt. And when the ashes settle, Cassian, we rebuild this empire together, as equals. He kissed her deeply, sealing a pact forged in blood and deception. The city didn't know it yet, but the entire balance of power in the underworld had just violently shifted. The untouchable boss had finally met his match, and the most dangerous person in that whole shadowy world turned out to be the one nobody ever saw coming, the fragile blind girl who stumbled in from the rain. So here's what I keep turning over in my head. Who was really in control this whole time? Cassian spent 10 years convinced he was the protector, the puppet master pulling strings from the shadows. But Lydia let him think exactly that the entire time, while she waited patiently for the moment she could use his empire to settle her own score. That's not a damsel in distress. That's a chess player who set up the board years before anyone else even sat down to play. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many people in our lives do we underestimate because of one single thing we think we know about them? Lydia turned the very thing the world saw as her greatest weakness into her sharpest weapon. There's something powerful in that, something worth remembering. If Lydia's hidden strength and that jaw-dropping twist caught you completely off guard, then do me a favor and smash that like button right now. It honestly helps more than you know. Share this story with someone who loves a heroine who flips the whole table when nobody's expecting it. And if you want more stories exactly like this one, full of betrayal, vengeance, and characters who refuse to be what the world tells them to be, make sure you hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's coming next. And drop a comment down below. Tell me, did you suspect Lydia was more than she seemed, or did that twist get you completely? And what do you think these two build together now that the masks are off? I read every single comment, and the best idea just might become the next story I tell. So don't be shy, let's hear it.